what I'd like to ask you, there are so many things, so many places we could begin in this conversation, but I'd like to ask Ken, just for now, what is most concerning about right this moment in relation to what's happening in the world? And you could start anywhere. You could start with
I mean, things are always split into domestic and international, aren't they?
Yeah.
So internationally, it has to be the terrible atrocities in Syria and the terrible pain that people are going through there. And then spreading out from that, the whole area, which is so destabilised, and not forgetting that this is the 70th anniversary of the Palestinian Nakba, where their land was taken from them, and Israel was founded, and that's also an anniversary to remember. What am I concerned about? I'm concerned about Trump. Like we all are. I'm concerned about the you never know what's fake and what's real. We guess everything is said for effect, but whether the man is really unstable or he's playing the game of being unstable, we just don't know. And clearly, Putin again has his own agenda. And they're both ruthless, one suspects, in defence of their own position. I think it's more in defence of their own position than anything else, because the actions of neither of them seem to reflect well on the interests of their people. But domestically, I think it's a really unique moment, because certainly in Britain, I would feel I'm in Ireland. And I am in Ireland. And so when I talk about Britain, I imagine it's over there. But I know things are different as regards the north. So I'm always caught in this slight dilemma, really, because I think of Ireland as separate. But in British politics, it is a unique moment because the Labour Party has a leadership unlike any it's had before, with a real possibility of cutting back the power of capital and really reasserting socialist values of common ownership and the public interest, the public good against private profit, and basing international relations on the rule of law, on human rights, on the Geneva Conventions, on the United Nations. I mean, this is unheard of in our politics. And he arrived because of a complete failure of the right wing of the Labour Party to hang on to power. I mean, it's a bit like, I don't know if you saw the West Ham game last night, but it's a bit like Joe Hart dropping the ball in front of the goal and somebody just pokes it in. And that's what happened. They thought, well, we better allow a left winger to stand because it'll look better and nobody will vote for him. And suddenly, the majority of Labour voters said, well, you've finally woken up. Yes, that's what we want. That's who we are. And the left winger was elected, much to their horror and chagrin and rage. And now the question is to defend him and John McDonnell, to keep their position secure, to extend the manifesto. It was good as far as it went, but it needs to go much further. And I know they're working on that. But it's a huge political struggle to keep them in place, because the attacks, as you've seen, range from the far right to don't know how to describe The Guardian politely, but the softest of the soft left, The Guardian, not to mention the BBC and all broadcasters. So with the whole, what they call the mainstream media against Jeremy and John McDonnell, it's a huge political battle to keep them in place, and that's what I've been partly involved in.
We'll come back to the international scene in just a moment, but just on what you're talking about right now, why did Theresa May do what she did in Syria? When we are hearing reports that people in Britain are not in favour of what she did.
I think it's probably not on something to do with the reason that Blair went into Iraq, is that they they see themselves as dependent on the United States. And I think if the United States says jump, we jump. And I think that's because it doesn't make any sense otherwise. Because if you want an excuse to invade, well, I mean, they've been doing terrible things for many years. I mean, there've been atrocity after atrocity on many sides. And I'm no expert on it. I don't just pretend that I have an expertise I don't have. But if you wanted an excuse to say we're defending human life or whatever, or protecting the civilians, there's been excuse after excuse. We don't know what the evidence is for the chemical attack. I mean, there are different reports. There may well have been a chemical attack. I'm sure they're all capable of it. But I mean, don't let's go back to the First World War and talk about, have they forgotten Agent Orange in Vietnam? Have they forgotten the deformed babies born in Fallujah from the Iraq War?
CR gas in Lancashire in 1874 was an nerve agent.
Well, you're the person to speak about that rather than me, but absolutely. Absolutely, sir. So there's a long history of the West using chemical intervention, weapons, whatever you call so the way they speak as though they are pure and it's just others who use it, of course, is totally false, as you point out, and we all know. So it's difficult. The only way it seems to make sense to some of us is that it's a call to the United States, and that's why they're gone.
And everyone didn't answer that call. May did. But everyone didn't answer that call, and she could have said no.
Yeah.
Well, imagine she could have said no, and
Yeah.
she didn't. And I wonder, will that harm her chances in future? Will it affect her popularity? And you've said how much Jeremy Corbyn has against him, lined up against him. And what's been remarkable from this side, looking across at what happened in the last elections, was that Jeremy Corbyn came through despite all of the media massed against him, and despite all the predictions, that he came through was amazing. It was an amazing moment from our point of view over here as well.
Yes.
And so I'm trying to think forward and how things will shape up in the future, and will this harm Theresa May or not?
Well, the problem is that the media rallies the troops. Almost the entire press is gung ho for the war. I mean, they like a war to the British press. So they're all sounding the bugle for war and for aggressive actions like this. So she's getting a good press because of it. But as you say, people are less and less. The press are critical now because of social media. Their sales are going down. So who knows? It's difficult to judge, really. I don't think it does her any good. And as you say, that a majority of people are against the airstrikes. And you can see why, because what's it going to do? It's not going to do anything. And Trump, from having said, taken by surprise, said, hey, we'll give you a week's notice, we're going to do it. I mean, come on, And May's reason, the issue of Parliament deciding, I guess there was a chance that she would have been voted down. So that's why she didn't do it. But it's difficult to know whether it will harm her. As I say, the press she gets is very supportive. So they might counteract people's instinctive reaction that this is not a good idea.
We made an intervention in the recent debate about anti-Semitism, and if you like how it was used against Jeremy Corbyn, you suggested that Labour members who protested should be deselected. Am I right?
No.
Oh, good.
You see that?
I'm reading the wrong press, obviously.
Yes. Well, it's very interesting. I'll try and tell the story really quickly. I went into a Labour Party meeting near Bristol, and we talked about the necessity, this is the substantive point I tried to make, and others made in the meeting as well, that if Jeremy Corbyn is elected with John McDonnell, and they have a big programme of public investment, ending privatisation, public investment in work, public ownership of transport, getting the privatisation out of the NHS, the international principles that we talked about earlier, and so on. They're a big threat to capital, big threat to big business. Increasing trade union rights again, giving everyone the right to be in a trade union, and so on. So they're going to need a party in Parliament that will really support that, because if they're divided, I mean, 3/4 of these MPs, I think, round about that, it should have voted no confidence in. Most of the people in the shadow cabinet refused to serve with them. Well, they're still there. Now, if you go back into Parliament with Jeremy and John McDonnell's programme, like I said, 3/4 of the MPs against it, just think the chaos that's going to happen. They're going to be subverting it, they're going to be briefing the media, they're going to be on television saying how bad it is. You saw them on the back benches from last night, even attacking him for calling for a parliamentary debate. A guy called Chris Leslie, who was in the shadow cabinet. He was in Gordon Brown's government. So that'll be a disaster. It'll stop us getting the changes we need. Therefore, I suggested that, and many others have suggested, that we need new MPs committed to the programme. How are you going to do that? At the moment it's quite difficult. But I said they should demand reselection, and they should take into account the political principles people have stood on, their actions, their record, their behaviour, their loyalty to the current leadership, bearing in mind the massive increase in party membership from 200,000 to nearly 600,000 because of Jeremy and John, and their massive support for this programme in the party. You should look at their principles, record, their history, and their loyalty. Okay, one way of looking at that is those MPs who stood underneath banners attacking Jeremy Corbyn and demanding action on anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. That's a whole other issue. Very happy to talk about it, but it's slightly at a tangent. Those who went on that demonstration, alongside people, for example, the Board of Deputies chair, who was one of the first to send congratulations to Trump, bearing in mind what kind of man Trump is, his attitude to women, his attitude to immigrants from Mexico, calling them whores and drug dealers, and really disgraceful, disgusting things that were said by that man. If you're one of the first people to send him a note of congratulations, do you want to stand so alongside them? For that reason, I wouldn't. But also the placards were against Corbyn. Now, fine, you might well want to make a point about racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, all that. Absolutely fine. Make that point. Don't stand underneath placards saying against Corbyn. You can do one without doing the other. And I said Labour Party members might like to remember that when they're choosing their candidate for the next election. That was all. It was then picked up by a local paper that then said, they included in the report that I wanted to oust any Labour member of Parliament who'd been to the demonstration. The Daily Mail, no friend of Labour, picked it up, and then I say, kick out Labour MPs who've been on the demonstration. And then the next thing, then it's picking up by the newspapers, and then Barry Gardner, Labour shadow minister, no less, attacks me on Question Time on the basis of the Daily Mail, without bothering to check whether I actually said it or not. So that's the story. But I think it reveals more about the people who reported it than the substantial point that most people in the meeting agreed with. Sorry, it's a long story, but there you go.
Thank you. Has anyone anything to ask about this issue before we move on? Yes, thank you. Two people, yes. Which one? Person in front of you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just
Can you shout? Can you shout?
yeah. Do you oppose mandatory reselection then, or are you in support of it?
I'm in support of mandatory reselection, but I wouldn't call it that really. I think we need a new system where at every election there's a slate of candidates, and at every election the party chooses a candidate for that election. So it's a routine. It's not you have to, have your hands in the till to get deselected. It should be a natural democratic process, because somebody who's done quite well for 5 years, there might be somebody more committed to the programme you want to support. There might be somebody with better qualifications, somebody with a specific experience you want in Parliament. So there's all kinds of reasons why you might want to change your Member of Parliament. Not to do with something bad they've done or wicked, and it's to do with the constant regeneration of the democratic process. And it's a bit fundamental. Being an MP is not a job for life, as people have said. It's a democratic process. In every election, every councillor, every parliamentary election used to say, okay, who wants to apply for the job? And maybe have a list of 5 or 6. Maybe the party nationally might say, look, there's somebody around who would be brilliant in foreign affairs, say, or brilliant in finance. If you can find a space for them, great. If not, it's your choice. So they might make a selection or two if it's in good faith and not about, keeping control. And then you'd have another group locally, and say you have 5 or 6, and then all the members say, well, that's the one we want. That seems to me basic democracy.
Thank you. Just behind there.
Okay. Can I say, first of all, welcome back to Belfast.
Thanks a lot.
It's good to see you here. We in Ireland are no strangers to hostile media, and are you. From Cathy Come Home to Hidden Agenda. If you had it depended upon a media's fair wind, you'd be bankrupt. And if we had it depended on the British media, we would still be wearing shackles and ropes around our neck. Is it our imagination or my imagination that the hostility of the media, the false news that's been produced about any progressive force, whether it's Corburn, whether it's Ireland, whether it's the Palestinians, whether it's going on, is the media becoming more blatant and less efforts to try and disguise their political hostility, or is it just all our imagination?
I think the basic stance doesn't change. I think it depends how confident the ruling class is. The ruling class feels confident that you're no threat, they'll let you speak. If they think they're in danger, they close down. We saw that. There'll be many examples. Ireland's one case, your situation is in one case where they would not allow Republicans to speak, as you know. They weren't allowed. Their voices were revoiced, by actors who came in and was sometimes allowed to use their words. Ridiculous. Made themselves look foolish, which they are. During the miners' strike, no representation given to the miners' case on the BBC. There was a case where footage was reversed to make it look as though the miners were throwing stones before the police charged them with their batons. Police charged first. The story on the BBC, the story in the press, was picket line violence. Of course, it soon became apparent afterwards, sometime afterwards, that all the charges against the miners were dropped, and or almost all, and then the stories of the police violence emerged. So of course they let the truth out when it can do them no harm. And I know you've suffered from that almost more than anywhere else in these islands. So their fundamental stance doesn't change. It's just their tactics change according to the political balance of power, I think.
Can I ask you, Joe, why you think it's gotten worse? Why you think the media is more brazen?
I think we're probably well used to this media that reflects political values which are not necessarily ours. I do think, in fact, that what has happened is they became, I suppose, more blatant about it, and they tend to be more blunt about it. And there's many examples. Not only, for instance, and you mentioned the plight of Jeremy at the moment in terms of a stand on the Palestinians, for instance. So if you support the Palestinians' right to homeland, you're anti-Jewish. Now, we all know that's not true. I think that what we're witnessing now is a political fight back, spearheaded by the media, particular sections of the media who have not been particularly professional, but now are just so party political and so politically motivated that they don't even bother about false news. They just promote false stories. Syria is an example of it, and I don't know what happened in Syria. I'm quite prepared to wait for an investigation. The debate that was called for by the Labour Party, to me, seems a quite logical and reasonable thing. But if you listen to the media, it's almost treacherous that if you don't automatically support the bombing of someone in order to bring about peace, that you're somehow counterproductive. The obvious story a few months ago that Jeremy Corbyn is a Russian spy was inspired to come around at a particular moment when that turmoil in the Labour Party was developing. And I know, and I've listened to you, been interviewed a number of times, and I know that some of the films that you've made, which everybody in the room thinks are wonderful, I'm sure, but they were the subject of almost picking apart by sections of the media, from Kathy Come Home, as I've mentioned, which was a wonderful film, or a wonderful documentary type film, right through to the more recent stuff. And it just strikes me that they're obviously more blatant than what they were. So thank you.
Thank you. Person in the front here.
I just wanted to go back to what you were saying about the Syrian bombing. I wanted to ask, basically, you know, with the Mueller investigation going the way that it's going, and now you're sort of seeing the rats abandoning the ship. I think it was Paul Ryan the other day stepped down, and then Rex Tillerson. Trump was going to fire him, and then Rex Tillerson, former VP of ExxonMobil, told Trump, "No, I work for ExxonMobil, I tell you when I quit." And then the raid in the office and so on. So do you think that the Syria bombing was Trump trying to misdirect the media, sort of saying, "Look, I'm anti-Russia, I'm going to bomb them"? Because at the end of the day, you know, they did call and say, "These are where we're going to bomb, make sure there's nobody there." And then they just left a hole in the side of Syria. It didn't do anything, but it did distract the public. Do you think that maybe that's what was going on there from Trump's point of view?
It could well be. I mean, I don't know enough about the intricacies of American politics to pontificate about it. The only thing that I think we know for certain that his interests are, first of all, himself, and related to that, the power of American capital. Because if business turns against him, he'll be out. So obviously he's playing a game, placating one vested interest, you know, alongside another, so that he's got enough political muscle to carry on. Who knows? I don't know. I mean, I used to work with a great writer called Jim Allen, and he said what politicians have is jungle agility. You know, the ability to swing from one branch to another in the jungle and survive. And that's obviously what Trump has got. But exactly who is demanding what, and who's got him by the throat, who knows, really. I couldn't say. Your guess is as good as mine.
I'm sorry, I will kick myself if I don't ask this question. It's just 'cause next year I really want to study. I'm going to be studying moving images. I want to get into filmmaking. I've decided that in my old age I'm going to, you know, try this career path.
Don't talk about old age for Christ's sake. You're 55.
Years ago when you were working, I think it was on My Name is Joe, one of the actors that was in it, he said that the way that you would hide the camera crews and stuff to get a natural reaction out of people, which is something that's made your film specifically unique, that your films don't really feel like you're watching a film, you're watching a documentary about a real life person. You know, some actors that people don't know, and some actors like Robert Carlyle, people do know, performed their absolute best, in my opinion, with you, and you sort of got that natural human reaction from people. How did you do that? Like, how exactly have you managed to do that throughout your career? It just seems that every film has it.
Well, you're asking me for the trade secrets now. Well, you just pick up a few ideas on the way, really. I mean, when I began, I did a police series called Z-Cars, and what happened with that, it was done in the studio, and we did, you had to do it in 3 weeks, like cast it and rehearse it and then shoot it, and you had 2 days or 1 day in the studio. No, we recorded live. It was shot in the studio live. What am I saying? So it was 50 minutes long. So they did it like a play, live, running from set to set, with bits of film inserted. So you had to rehearse it. And what would happen is the regulars were there. They were the regulars, and the director had to cast the other parts. So you would have a few days to cast it, and then you'd have a read through. And when we had the read through, and everybody came, they were terrific. And I thought, that's brilliant. No, this is going to be even better when I've rehearsed them. But actually what happened was, you guessed it, they were worse. They were worse. Because what made them good at the beginning was the first time you hear something from someone, you just hear it. And you respond in a way you never catch again. And so I thought, well, there's a lesson here. So we don't rehearse. We shoot it in sequence, we rehearse or we improvise the things that might have happened before the film starts, so that you if there's a family relationship, you work that out and you rehearse it, you improvise little scenes like having a meal together, coming in from work, just as normal things of family life, the rows, who has the power, who's the strong one, who always gives way, all those things that make families fascinating and terrible and funny and all that. And so you rehearse that. If someone's got a job and they're not actually a professional, then they learn about the job and what kind of person how you become when you do a job, because that defines us, doesn't it, by and large. You know, if you're, whatever the work is, it's your identity in your own mind, and your skill is something you're very proud of. So you have to rehearse that. Then we shoot the film in sequence. If there's a surprise, we shoot the surprise, and if it goes wrong, well, you do it again, and then you adapt it and so on. Don't tell them the ending. They don't know. They have the script in bits, so that it goes, up to another stage, whatever that stage is. It might be halfway through the scene you're shooting. It may be, and for the next week.
It's difficult on the actor though if they don't know the ending and they have to perform it. I mean, done a wee bit of stage, and it just, if I didn't know what was coming, I would be petrified. Like,
well, no, it's a liberation, I think, because what you've got to do is play that moment absolutely dead truthfully. Just play the truth of the moment. Because if you're living your life, you don't play a scene. Well, my God, there's some disaster next week. You don't do it. You just do it flat out for the moment. So no, just do it like that, because that's the real experience, And I mean, there've been things where it's a great test of the writing, because if their response is as the writing goes, then that's the writer is vindicated in a way. I mean, he's got it right, and I work with wonderful writers, and the films aren't mine. If they're anybody's, they're the writers. They're the prime creative impulse. The director, is part of it. But so Jim Allen, Barry Hines, and Paul Laverty for last quarter of a century, wonderful, wonderful writer. And if it doesn't take too long, I mean, one little story about where the surprise worked against it.